Hey guys. Tonight, we're going somewhere dry, dusty, and brutal. We're heading to the American frontier in the 1870s, where the great railroads stretched their iron fingers across endless plains and unforgiving mountains. Before we begin, please like and subscribe only if you actually enjoy this sort of thing. I know this content isn't for everyone, but if you find comfort in these quiet journeys through history's forgotten corners, your support means everything. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is where you are. Drop a comment and let me know if you're winding down after a long day, or maybe you're already tucked in bed, ready to drift away to another time and place. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft hum, and settle in. Let's drift back in time. You wake up to the sound of a distant whistle, though it's not yet dawn. The canvas of your tent sags slightly above your face, heavy with moisture from the night air. Your body aches in places you didn't know existed yesterday. Your shoulders throb with a deep, persistent pain that seems to have settled into the very bones. You shift slightly on your thin bedroll, feeling the uneven ground beneath you through the worn fabric. The air inside the tent is stale and warm, carrying the scent of unwashed bodies, tobacco, and the faint smell of the kerosene lamp that burned out hours ago. Someone nearby is snoring softly, a rhythmic sound that has become as familiar as your own breathing over these past months. You can hear the quiet rustle of others beginning to stir, the soft groans and sighs of men whose bodies protest the coming of another day. You lie there for a moment longer, knowing that once you sit up, once you push aside this thin blanket, the day will begin in earnest. Your hands are still stiff from yesterday's work, the calluses thick and hardened, but underneath them, your palms are tender and raw. You flex your fingers slowly, feeling the tight pull of skin that has been split and healed and split again. The first hint of gray light seeps through the tent flap, casting everything in a dim, colorless wash. You can hear boots scraping against hard earth outside, the quiet conversations of the early risers, men who have learned to wake before the foreman's call. You know you should join them, should pull yourself upright and begin the slow process of preparing for another day of breaking your back under the western sun. You sit up slowly, your spine protesting with small pops and creaks. The tent around you is cramped, barely tall enough for you to sit upright without your head brushing the sagging canvas. 3 other men share this space with you, their belongings scattered around the small interior. A pair of worn boots here, a dented tin cup there, a photograph of someone's family back east, creased and faded from handling. You reach for your own boots, leather cracked and dusty, the laces frayed from weeks of use. Your feet are tender and swollen, the skin between your toes raw from the constant moisture and friction. You pull on your socks, feeling the rough patches where they've been darned and re-darned, then work your feet into the boots. Each morning, this simple act feels like preparing for battle. The man next to you, O'Brien, rolls over and coughs, a harsh sound that shakes his entire frame. He's been coughing like that for weeks now, but there's no doctor here. No medicine except for the harsh whiskey that some men use to dull every kind of pain. O'Brien opens his eyes and looks at you with that same weary expression you've all learned to wear. He nods slightly, the only greeting necessary between men who share this particular kind of misery. You push through the tent flap and step outside into the pre-dawn air. The world around you stretches endlessly in all directions, an vast expanse of prairie grass and distant hills that seem to mock your small human presence. The railroad camp is a collection of canvas tents and rough wooden structures scattered along the grade where yesterday's work ended. Smoke rises from a few early fires, thin columns that dissipate quickly in the dry air. The cook fire is already burning, tended by old Murphy, who seems to wake before God himself. He's stirring something in a large iron pot, probably the same thin gruel of beans and salt pork that has sustained you for weeks. The smell reaches you across the camp, not appetizing exactly, but familiar enough to make your empty stomach tighten with hunger. You walk slowly toward the fire, your boots crunching on the hard-packed earth. The morning air is cool against your face, a brief respite before the sun climbs high enough to turn this place into an oven. Other men emerge from their tents like ghosts, silent figures moving through the gray light with the careful movements of people whose bodies hurt. At the fire, you accept a tin cup of coffee that's more like brown water, weak and bitter but hot. The metal cup burns your fingers slightly, but you wrap both hands around it anyway, savoring the warmth. Steam rises from the surface, and you breathe it in, letting the heat touch your face. This is your morning luxury, these few minutes with hot coffee before the day's labor begins. Murphy ladles thick porridge into your tin bowl, the same dented bowl you've carried for months. The food is barely warm, a gray mixture that tastes of nothing much, but you eat it slowly anyway. Around you, other men do the same, spooning the tasteless meal into their mouths with the mechanical movements of people who eat for fuel rather than pleasure. The eastern horizon begins to show the faintest hint of pink, and you know your time is running short. Soon the foreman will emerge from his slightly larger tent, will begin calling out the day's assignments in his rough voice. You finish your coffee and porridge, rinse your bowl and cup in the bucket of murky water that serves the entire camp, and return them to your tent. You gather your tools from where you left them yesterday, each implement worn smooth by countless hands. Your sledgehammer, its handle darkened by sweat and use, its head chipped but still true. Your spike maul, lighter than the sledge but still heavy enough to drive iron through hardwood with repeated blows. A pry bar, useful for adjusting rails and pulling bent spikes. These tools have become extensions of your body, familiar weights that your muscles know by memory. The foreman appears, a thick man named Hartwell whose voice carries easily across the camp. He doesn't waste time with pleasantries or motivation. He simply calls out names and assignments, sending groups of men to different sections of the grade. Your name comes with a list of others, men you work beside every day but whose stories you know only in fragments shared during brief rests. You're assigned to rail laying today, which means your back will ache in a specific way by evening, the muscles along your spine tight and cramped from bending over the tracks. You shoulder your tools and walk with your crew toward yesterday's ending point, where two parallel lines of steel disappear into the distance behind you and end abruptly in raw earth ahead. The rails themselves are massive, each piece of steel weighing hundreds of pounds, too heavy for any one man to move alone. They arrive on flat cars that travel the completed track, brought forward as the line advances. Your job is to take these rails from the cars and set them precisely on the wooden ties that other crews have already positioned and leveled. The work begins before the sun has fully cleared the horizon. You and 5 other men gather around the first rail, positioning yourselves along its length. Hartwell calls out the count, and together you lift, feeling the steel's weight settle into your shoulders and back. The rail is warm from sitting in the sun yesterday, and rough against your hands despite the thick leather gloves you wear. Moving in careful synchronization, you carry the rail to its position on the ties. This requires precision. The rail must sit exactly right, aligned with its partner on the other side of the track, level and straight. Too high or too low, too far left or right, and trains will derail, men will die. The responsibility weighs on you as much as the steel itself. You set the rail down with a collective grunt, feeling the impact travel through your legs into the hard ground below. Immediately, other men move in with gauges and levels, checking the alignment while you catch your breath. Your shoulders already ache from that first lift, and there are dozens more rails to place today. The sun climbs higher, and with it comes the heat that will define your day. By mid-morning, the air shimmers with rising thermals, and your shirt clings to your back with sweat. The steel rails become almost too hot to touch, even through gloves, and the wooden ties expand and contract with soft creaking sounds. You take a brief drink from your water jug, warm water that tastes of the metal container but is still precious in this dry land. Water discipline is crucial here. There's never enough, and the nearest reliable source might be miles away. You allow yourself only a few swallows before returning to work. The process repeats endlessly: lift, carry, position, align. Your back develops a steady ache that never quite goes away, a constant reminder of the weight you're moving. Your hands, even protected by gloves, develop new blisters on top of old calluses. The repetitive motion creates its own rhythm, and you find yourself moving automatically, your body remembering the work even when your mind wanders. During one brief rest, you look back along the completed track, steel rails stretching to the horizon in perfectly parallel lines. It's impossible not to feel some small pride in this accomplishment, this permanent mark you're making on the landscape. But the pride is mixed with exhaustion, with the knowledge that tomorrow will bring more of the same, and the day after that, and the day after that. The Chinese workers on the next crew over move with a different rhythm, their smaller frames compensating with precise efficiency. They speak to each other in their own language, quick exchanges that you don't understand but that clearly communicate important information about the work. There's an art to their movements, a coordination that your crew is still learning. You've heard the other men make comments about the Chinese workers, not all of them kind, but you can't deny their skill. By noon, the sun beats down with relentless intensity. The metal tools become burning hot to the touch, and even the railroad ties seem to radiate heat upward. Your water jug is half empty, and you know you need to make it last until evening. The foreman calls a brief halt for the midday meal, and you walk slowly back toward camp, your legs stiff from crouching and lifting. The midday meal is much like breakfast: beans and salt pork, hardtack that requires strong teeth and patience, more of the weak coffee. You eat in whatever shade you can find, usually just the thin shadow cast by a supply wagon. The food tastes of salt and dust, but your body craves the calories, the fuel to continue the afternoon's work. Some men use this break to write letters home, scratching out messages on scraps of paper with stubby pencils. Others simply lie back against their packs and close their eyes, grabbing a few minutes of rest while they can. You choose to sit quietly, letting your muscles relax as much as possible, knowing that the afternoon shift will be harder than the morning. The work resumes with the sun at its peak, and now the heat becomes a living thing, pressing down on you with almost physical weight. Your shirt is soaked through within minutes, and salt stings your eyes as sweat runs down your forehead. The steel rails are now too hot to touch without gloves, and even then they burn through the leather if you maintain contact too long. You lift another rail, feeling the heat radiate through your gloves and up your arms. The weight seems heavier now, your muscles fatigued from the morning's work. Each lift requires more effort, more concentration to maintain your grip and your position relative to the other men. One mistake, one moment of inattention, and the rail could fall, crushing feet or legs. The afternoon stretches endlessly, each rail seeming to take longer than the last. Your water breaks become more frequent but necessarily shorter. You can't afford to run out before evening. The taste of dust seems to coat everything. Your mouth, your throat, even the water from your jug tastes gritty. Other crews work around you with the same steady determination. Men with picks and shovels prepare the grade ahead, breaking up hard earth and removing rocks. Others work behind you, driving spikes through the rail flanges into the wooden ties, the steady ring of hammers on steel creating a metallic percussion that echoes across the prairie. Your back aches constantly now, a deep throb that radiates down into your legs and up into your shoulders. Each time you bend to position a rail, your spine protests with sharp pains. You've learned to move more carefully, to lift with your legs rather than your back when possible, but the work doesn't always allow for proper form. The Chinese crew nearby has fallen into their own rhythm, their movements precise and economical. You notice that they seem to suffer less from the heat, their faces showing strain but not the same red-faced exhaustion that marks your crew. Perhaps it's experience, or perhaps they've simply learned better ways to pace themselves in this brutal environment. Late in the afternoon, disaster strikes in the form of a bent rail. During transport, one of the steel pieces has been damaged, a slight curve that makes it impossible to align properly with its neighbors. This means delay while men with hammers and wedges attempt to straighten it, or else the entire piece must be replaced. You stand in whatever shade you can find while the repair work proceeds, grateful for any excuse to rest but knowing that time lost now means working later into the evening. The bent rail resists efforts to straighten it, the steel having taken a permanent set that no amount of hammering seems to correct. Finally, the decision is made to replace the damaged rail entirely. This means unloading another piece from the supply train, carrying it forward, and beginning the positioning process again. Your crew shoulders the new rail with weary resignation. Muscles that were already exhausted now asked to perform the same lifting and carrying once more. As the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, the work takes on a different quality. The heat remains intense, but there's a psychological shift knowing that the day is progressing toward its end. Your movements become more automatic, your body running on reserves of energy you didn't know you possessed. The completed track behind you grows longer with each rail placed, a visible measure of the day's progress. It's not much in the grand scheme of the Transcontinental Railroad, just a few hundred yards of steel and wood, but it represents thousands of individual movements, countless pounds lifted and carried and positioned with aching precision. Your water jug is nearly empty now, just enough left for one or two small sips. Your mouth feels dry and sticky, coated with dust that no amount of water seems able to wash away completely. The salt from dried sweat makes your skin feel tight and uncomfortable, especially where your clothes rub against your body. As evening approaches, the foreman begins to look toward the western sun, calculating how much more work can be accomplished before darkness makes it too dangerous to continue. Rail laying requires precise alignment, work that becomes impossible once the light fades. Soon he'll call an end to the day's labor, but not quite yet. You lift what feels like the 100th rail of the day, your shoulders screaming in protest. The steel seems to have gained weight as the hours passed, each piece more challenging than the last. Your grip on the rail wavers slightly, and O'Brien steadies his end to compensate. These small moments of mutual support have become routine. You all understand that everyone's safety depends on working together despite individual exhaustion. Finally, mercifully, Hartwell calls an end to the workday. The last rail is positioned and aligned, the tools gathered and secured for the night. You walk slowly back toward camp, your legs stiff and unsteady after hours of heavy lifting. Around you, other crews are finishing their own tasks, the various sounds of construction gradually fading as the sun touches the horizon. Back at camp, you sit heavily on a wooden crate that serves as furniture, your back grateful for any support. Your hands shake slightly as you pour the last of your water into your mouth, the warm liquid barely enough to cut through the dust in your throat. Tomorrow there will be more water brought up from the nearest source, but tonight you'll go to sleep still thirsty. The afternoon shift continues with the relentless pace that has become your normal existence. Each rail lifted feels heavier than the last, not because the steel has changed, but because your muscles have been worked beyond their comfortable limits hours ago. You've entered that strange territory where movement becomes automatic, where your body continues to function despite sending constant signals of protest. The sun reaches its zenith and hangs there like a burning eye, casting short, harsh shadows that provide no relief. The steel rails shimmer with heat waves, and touching them even through thick leather gloves has become a careful dance of brief contact and quick release. The wooden ties beneath them expand and contract with soft creaking sounds, the resin inside them beginning to weep in sticky drops that attract clouds of insects. You pause for a moment to wipe your face with a bandana that's already soaked through with sweat and dust. The fabric comes away streaked with grime, a mixture of dirt and salt that has become the uniform coating of every man in this camp. Your eyes burn with the sting of salt and dust, and you blink rapidly to clear them, knowing that a moment of blurred vision while handling these heavy rails could mean disaster. The water in your jug has grown hot enough to brew tea, though it still provides necessary moisture for your parched throat. You allow yourself another small sip, feeling the liquid barely cut through the coating of dust that seems permanently settled in your mouth. The jug feels lighter each time you lift it, a constant reminder that this precious resource is finite and must be carefully rationed. Around you, other crews continue their own specialized tasks with the same grinding determination. A group of men with picks and shovels works ahead of your position, breaking up hardpan clay that rings like iron under their tools. Their movements have the steady rhythm of experienced laborers, each swing calculated to conserve energy while still accomplishing the necessary work. Sweat pours from their faces as they attack the stubborn earth, sending up small clouds of dust with each impact. Behind your crew, the spike drivers work with their own particular rhythm. These men wield heavy sledgehammers, driving iron spikes through pre-drilled holes in the rail flanges and deep into the wooden ties below. The sound of their work provides a constant metallic percussion, the ring of hammer on spike head echoing across the prairie in steady intervals. Each spike requires multiple blows to seat properly, and a single crew might drive hundreds in a day. You watch one of the spike drivers pause to examine his work, testing the tightness of a newly driven spike with careful taps of his hammer. This attention to detail is crucial. A loose spike can allow a rail to shift under the weight of a locomotive, potentially causing a derailment that could kill dozens of people. The responsibility weighs on every man here. The knowledge that sloppy work doesn't just affect productivity but can have deadly consequences. Your crew lifts another rail, the 42nd or 43rd of the day, though you've lost exact count. The steel feels like it's gained weight throughout the afternoon, each piece more challenging than the last. Your shoulders burn with accumulated fatigue, and your lower back has developed a constant ache that radiates down into your legs. The leather gloves on your hands are slick with sweat inside, making your grip on the hot steel precarious. The process of positioning this rail takes longer than usual. The ties beneath it aren't perfectly level, requiring careful adjustment to ensure the steel sits at the proper height and angle. You and your crew stand holding the heavy rail while other men work beneath it with wedges and small hammers, making tiny adjustments that seem insignificant but are crucial for the safety of future trains. While you wait, holding hundreds of pounds of steel in the blazing sun, you become acutely aware of every small discomfort. The way your shirt has dried and re-wetted with sweat so many times that it's stiff with salt. The feeling of grit between your teeth despite having eaten nothing since the noon meal. The particular ache in your right shoulder where you wrenched it lifting a rail incorrectly 3 weeks ago. An injury that never quite healed properly because there was no time to rest. Finally, the rail is positioned correctly, and you release your grip with profound relief. Your hands shake slightly from the sustained effort, and you flex your fingers to work out the cramps. The brief rest allows you to look around at the landscape that surrounds this temporary invasion of civilization. Miles of prairie grass stretching to the horizon, broken only by the raw scar of the railroad grade and the scattered equipment of the construction crews. The isolation of this place settles on you like the dust that coats everything. The nearest real town is days away by horseback, the nearest city a week or more. If someone were seriously injured here, if illness struck, there would be little that could be done except hope the quarterly supply train might carry them back to civilization. This knowledge adds weight to every lifted rail, every driven spike, every careful step on uneven ground. A brief commotion draws your attention to the Chinese crew working parallel to your position. One of their men has suffered a minor injury, nothing serious, but enough to remind everyone of how quickly things can go wrong. The injured man sits in whatever shade can be found while his teammates examine a gash on his forearm, probably caused by a sharp edge on one of the rails. There's no doctor in camp, no medical supplies beyond basic bandages and harsh whiskey for disinfectant. You watch as they clean and bind the wound with strips torn from a spare shirt, their movements careful and practiced. These men have learned to take care of each other because there's often no one else to do it. The injured man tests his arm gingerly, nods to his companions, and returns to work despite the fresh bandage. There's no choice, the work must continue, and a minor injury is insufficient reason to stop. The afternoon sun continues its relentless assault, and you begin to feel the first signs of heat exhaustion creeping in around the edges of your consciousness. A slight dizziness when you stand up quickly, a feeling of nausea that comes and goes, a headache that throbs in time with your pulse. You've seen men collapse from the heat, their bodies simply unable to continue functioning in these conditions, and you know the warning signs well. You force yourself to take another careful sip of hot water, knowing that dehydration will only make the heat exhaustion worse. The water tastes metallic and unpleasant, but it's life itself in this environment. You've learned to drink even when you don't feel thirsty, to force the liquid down even when your stomach rebels against it. The work continues with mechanical precision. Lift, carry, position, align. Each rail identical to the last, each placement following the same careful procedure. Your body moves automatically now, muscle memory taking over as your conscious mind retreats from the relentless discomfort. This dissociation is both a blessing and a danger. It allows you to continue working despite the pain, but it also means you might miss important details or safety concerns. A new rail waits on the flat car, its surface already too hot to touch comfortably. The steel has been sitting in the sun for hours, absorbing heat until it radiates warmth like a stove. You and your crew gather around it, positioning yourselves for the lift. The routine has become so familiar that little verbal communication is necessary. Everyone knows their position, their role in the complex dance of moving these massive pieces of steel. The lift itself feels harder than usual, your muscles protesting more vigorously as you hoist the rail to shoulder height. Your legs tremble slightly under the combined weight of the steel and your own fatigue. Each step toward the positioning point requires conscious concentration to maintain balance and grip. The hot metal seems to burn through your gloves, and you know you'll have new blisters by evening. Halfway to the positioning point, O'Brien stumbles slightly, his end of the rail dipping dangerously low. The sudden shift in weight catches everyone off guard, and for a moment it seems the entire piece might fall. You all adjust quickly, redistributing the load, but the near accident serves as a sharp reminder of how dangerous this work becomes when exhaustion sets in. A dropped rail could easily crush a foot or break a leg, injuries that would be devastating in this remote location. You successfully position the rail and step back, breathing heavily from the exertion. Your heart pounds in your chest, and you can feel sweat running down your back in steady streams. The brief rest between rails has become increasingly precious as the day wears on, these few minutes to catch your breath and steel yourself for the next lift. The sun seems frozen in the western sky, its movement imperceptible from one moment to the next. Time has taken on a strange quality in this place, each minute stretching endlessly while somehow the hours still pass. You've learned not to look at the sun's position too often. It only makes the remaining work seem more daunting. Better to focus on the immediate task, the next rail, the next spike, the next small step forward in this enormous project. A train whistle sounds in the distance, probably the evening supply run bringing water, food, and materials for tomorrow's work. The sound carries clearly across the prairie, a reminder of the civilization that this railroad will eventually connect. For now, though, that whistle might as well be coming from another world. Here, there is only the immediate reality of steel and sweat, dust and endless repetitive labor. The afternoon shift has stretched your endurance to its breaking point. Each movement now requires conscious effort, each lift a triumph of will over the body's urgent demands for rest. Your hands have developed new blisters despite the thick calluses, and you can feel moisture inside your boots that might be sweat or might be blood from raw spots on your feet. You take another rail from the supply car, this one somehow seeming heavier than all the others. The steel is so hot now that even brief contact through gloves is painful. You position yourself with the other men, feeling the familiar weight settle onto your shoulders. The muscles in your back spasm slightly in protest, but you ignore the warning and begin the careful walk to the positioning point. This rail fights you more than the others, seeming to have a will of its own as you try to place it precisely on the waiting ties. The alignment is off by inches, requiring multiple adjustments that keep you bent over the heavy steel for longer than usual. Your spine feels like it might snap under the strain, and dark spots dance at the edges of your vision. Still, the work continues, because it must continue, because there is no alternative in this place where stopping means failure. Finally, mercifully, the rail settles into its proper position. You straighten slowly, feeling vertebrae pop and crack as your spine returns to its normal curve. The brief satisfaction of completing another piece of the great work is immediately overwhelmed by the knowledge that there are more rails waiting, more lifting, more positioning still to be done before the day ends. The supply train arrives as the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, bringing fresh water that tastes like salvation after hours of drinking the heated contents of your jug. You allow yourself a longer drink this time, feeling the relatively cool liquid wash away some of the dust coating your throat. The water carries the metallic taste of the tank car it came from, but after the hot, stale water you've been rationing all day, it might as well be champagne. With the arrival of fresh supplies comes a subtle shift in the rhythm of work. Men begin to calculate how much more can be accomplished before darkness makes rail laying too dangerous to continue. The foreman walks the grade, checking progress, estimating how many more rails can be positioned before calling an end to the day's labor. You lift what you hope will be the final rail of your shift, your body moving purely on determination now. Every muscle in your back and shoulders screams in protest, but you've moved beyond the point where pain can stop you. This is survival now, pushing through barriers that seemed impossible to cross just hours ago. The rail settles into position with the same careful precision as all the others, another small piece of the transcontinental dream. As the sun touches the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, the foreman finally calls an end to the day's work. The sound of his voice carries across the grade like a benediction, releasing you from the relentless cycle of lifting and positioning that has defined the last 10 hours. You set down your tools with hands that shake from exhaustion, muscles that have been pushed far beyond their normal limits. The walk back to camp feels longer than usual, your legs unsteady after hours of heavy labor. Around you, other crews are also finishing their work, the various sounds of construction gradually fading as the sun sinks lower. The heat still radiates from the ground beneath your feet, but the air temperature is finally beginning to drop as evening approaches. Back at camp, you sit heavily on whatever surface presents itself, your back grateful for any support after hours of lifting and bending. Your body feels like it belongs to someone else, a collection of aches and pains held together by will and necessity. The simple act of removing your gloves reveals new damage to your hands, fresh blisters and raw spots that will be tender for days. The evening meal preparation begins around the cook fire, the same routine that ends every day. Your hunger is profound, a deep emptiness that makes even the prospect of beans and salt pork seem appealing. You know your body desperately needs the nutrition, the fuel to repair the damage done by today's work and prepare for tomorrow's identical challenges. Murphy ladles the familiar mixture into your tin bowl, the same gray combination of beans and preserved meat that has sustained you for months. The food is bland and monotonous, but your body craves the calories and salt you've lost through hours of sweating under the prairie sun. You eat slowly, partly from exhaustion and partly to make the meal last as long as possible. Around the fire, conversations are muted and brief. Men too tired for extended discussion focus on the basic necessities of eating and preparing for sleep. Someone mentions hearing rumors about Indian activity to the north, but the comment receives only tired acknowledgments. The immediate need for rest overshadows concerns about distant threats. You finish your meal and perform the evening ritual of cleaning your few possessions. The tin bowl and cup receive a cursory rinse in the bucket of murky water that serves the entire camp. Your tools get wiped down and checked for damage, a necessary maintenance that ensures they'll be ready for tomorrow's work. These simple tasks feel monumental when every movement requires conscious effort. The walk to your tent feels like a journey across continents, though it's barely 100 yards from the fire. Your legs move stiffly, muscles locked into patterns established by the day's labor. The ground beneath your feet still radiates the heat absorbed during the long, brutal afternoon, adding to the overall discomfort that has become your constant companion. Inside the tent, you remove your boots with a sense of profound relief, feeling your feet expand slightly as they're freed from the leather constraints that have held them all day. Your socks are soaked with sweat and stiff with salt, but they're the only pair you have, so they'll be worn again tomorrow and the day after that. The luxury of clean, dry clothing is a memory from another life. You lie back on your thin bedroll, feeling every rock and root beneath the canvas floor. The ground is unforgiving, but after 16 hours of standing and walking and lifting, even this hard surface feels like a reprieve. Your spine slowly begins to decompress, vertebrae settling back into their proper alignment after hours of strain. O'Brien settles into his own space with the same collection of groans and sighs that mark the end of every day. In the dim light filtering through the canvas walls, you can see him working at his shoulders, trying to massage away knots of tension that mirror your own. The other men in the tent move with identical care, bodies pushed to their absolute limits by the day's demands. The sounds of the camp gradually settling for the night filter through the tent walls. Quiet conversations grow quieter, boots scrape against hard earth one final time, someone in a distant tent coughs with the harsh sound that comes from breathing too much dust. These familiar noises become a lullaby of sorts, the soundtrack of exhausted men preparing for sleep. You lie in the darkness, acutely aware of the day's dust settled into every fold of your clothing, every pore of your skin. Despite the water you drank, your mouth still tastes of grit and salt. Your hands, even relaxed, maintain the curved shape needed to grip tools and rails, muscles cramped into permanent readiness for tomorrow's identical work. The night air finally begins to cool, though the earth beneath your body continues to radiate the heat absorbed during the brutal afternoon. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote calls, its voice carrying clearly across the vast emptiness that surrounds this temporary outpost of civilization. The sound emphasizes the isolation of this place, the vast distances that separate you from anything resembling home. Your thoughts drift briefly to the life you left behind, to beds with actual mattresses and meals that contained fresh vegetables and meat that hadn't been preserved in barrels of salt. But these memories bring more pain than comfort, so you let them fade like the last light of evening. The present reality is all that matters now. The need for rest, the preparation for tomorrow's identical challenges. Sleep approaches gradually, settling over your exhausted body like the dust that coats everything in this place. Your breathing deepens and slows, your muscles finally beginning to relax after hours of constant tension. In your dreams, you know, there will be more rails to lift, more steel to position, more endless repetition under the merciless sun. But for now, there is only the darkness of the tent, the soft sounds of other exhausted men finding their own rest, and the gradual descent into unconsciousness that comes when the body has been pushed beyond all reasonable limits and simply shuts down to preserve itself for another day of the same grinding, relentless labor that has become your entire existence. The hours before dawn pass in fitful sleep, your body too exhausted to find true rest. Every position on the hard ground brings new discomfort, and you shift constantly, trying to find some arrangement of limbs that doesn't aggravate the day's accumulated injuries. Your right shoulder throbs with a deep ache that seems to penetrate to the bone, while your lower back maintains a constant burning sensation that no amount of repositioning can relieve. In the darkness, you can hear O'Brien's labored breathing, punctuated by occasional coughs that shake his entire frame. The sound has worsened over the past weeks, a harsh rattle that speaks of too much dust breathed in, too many days working in conditions that would challenge the strongest constitution. You wonder if he'll last through the winter, if any of you will, but these thoughts are too dark for the small hours of the night. The canvas above your head sags with accumulated moisture from the breath of 4 sleeping men, occasionally releasing small drops that land on your face with surprising coldness. The tent provides minimal protection from the elements, just enough fabric to create the illusion of shelter while allowing every sound, every shift in temperature, every breath of wind to penetrate your attempted rest. Around 3 in the morning, you give up trying to sleep and lie quietly, listening to the sounds of the prairie night. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls with its hollow, haunting voice. Closer to camp, you can hear the stamp and snort of the workhorses, restless in their makeshift corral. These animals work as hard as the men, hauling supplies and equipment across terrain that challenges every step. The pre-dawn hours stretch endlessly, each minute marked by small discomforts that prevent true rest. Your mouth feels like it's been filled with cotton and dust, despite the water you drank before sleeping. The taste of salt and grime seems permanently etched into your palate, a constant reminder of the environment that has become your entire world. You think about the letter you started writing to your sister back in Ohio, the one that sits unfinished in your small collection of personal belongings. What words could possibly convey the reality of this place, this existence that seems as foreign to your former life as if you'd traveled to another planet? How do you describe the weight of steel rails, the burn of sun on exposed skin, the particular exhaustion that comes from pushing your body beyond all reasonable limits day after day? The first hint of gray light begins to seep through the tent flap, and you know that soon the camp will begin to stir. The foreman will emerge from his slightly larger tent, the cook will tend his fire, and another day identical to yesterday will begin. The knowledge sits in your stomach like a cold stone, the certainty that today will bring the same grinding labor, the same heat, the same endless repetition of tasks that seem to accomplish so little while demanding so much. You dress slowly in the dim light, your movements careful and deliberate to avoid waking the other men. Your work clothes are stiff with dried sweat and dust, the fabric rough against skin that's been abraded by repeated contact with coarse materials. The shirt that was once blue has faded to a nondescript gray, its original color visible only in protected areas like the inside of seams. Your boots require special attention each morning, a careful examination for cracks or weak spots that could lead to injury during the day's work. The leather is cracked and worn, the soles thin from walking on rough ground. You work dubbing into the worst of the cracks, though you know it's a temporary measure at best. New boots are a luxury that won't be available until the next supply run, assuming the company is willing to advance the cost against your wages. The morning ritual of preparing for work has become as automatic as breathing. Each tool must be examined, each piece of equipment checked for damage or wear. Your sledgehammer handle shows new stress fractures near the head, hairline cracks that speak of the thousands of impacts it has absorbed. It will hold for now, but you make a mental note to request a replacement handle when the next supply train arrives. Outside the tent, the camp is beginning to show signs of life. Smoke rises from Murphy's cooking fire, and you can see other men emerging from their shelters with the slow, careful movements of people whose bodies hurt. The morning air carries the scent of brewing coffee, weak as it is, and your stomach responds with a hollow rumble that reminds you of yesterday's inadequate meals. The eastern horizon shows the first suggestion of sunrise, a pale band of light that promises another day of brutal heat. But for now, the air is cool and relatively pleasant, a brief respite before the sun climbs high enough to turn this place into an furnace. You savor these few minutes of comfortable temperature, knowing they're precious and temporary. At the cook fire, Murphy ladles the morning porridge into your tin bowl with the practiced efficiency of a man who has fed hungry workers for decades. The mixture is the same gray, tasteless combination as always, but your body craves the calories it provides. You eat standing up, spooning the warm mush into your mouth while scanning the eastern sky for signs of the coming weather. The coffee is barely worthy of the name, more like brown-tinted water with a vague hint of coffee flavor, but it's hot and provides the caffeine your exhausted system desperately needs. You cup the tin mug in both hands, feeling the warmth penetrate through the metal to your palms. Steam rises from the surface, and you breathe it in, letting the heat touch your face in a small moment of comfort. Around you, other men go through their own morning preparations with the mechanical precision of soldiers. Tools are gathered and inspected, water jugs filled from the communal barrel, personal items secured against the day's activities. Conversations are minimal. Everyone understands that energy spent on words is energy not available for the work ahead. The foreman appears as the sun clears the horizon, his presence signaling the official start of another workday. Hartwell's assignments come with the same brusque efficiency as always, names called and tasks assigned without wasted words. Your crew is designated for rail laying again, which means your back will develop that familiar burning ache before the morning is half over. You shoulder your tools and walk toward the worksite, your legs still stiff from yesterday's exertions. The completed track stretches behind you in perfectly parallel lines, a visible measure of progress that seems insignificant against the vast distances still to be covered. Ahead, the grade disappears into rolling prairie, marked only by survey stakes and the occasional pile of supplies. The morning's work begins with the familiar routine of unloading rails from the supply cars. Each piece of steel weighs nearly as much as a full-grown man, and moving them requires careful coordination among the crew members. The rails are still cool from the night air, but you know that within hours they'll be too hot to touch even through heavy gloves. Your crew gathers around the first rail of the day, positioning yourselves along its length with the precision born of countless repetitions. The steel feels solid and cold under your gloves, deceptively manageable before the sun begins its work of heating everything to painful temperatures. On Hartwell's count, you lift together, feeling the familiar weight settle into your shoulders and back. The walk to the positioning point requires careful steps on uneven ground, each man maintaining his grip while watching for obstacles that could cause a stumble. A dropped rail doesn't just mean wasted effort. It could easily crush a foot or break a leg, injuries that would be devastating in this remote location. The nearest doctor is days away by horseback, assuming one could even be found. You set the rail down on the waiting ties with collective relief, feeling the impact travel through your legs into the packed earth below. Immediately, other men move in with levels and gauges, checking the alignment while you catch your breath. The precision required is extraordinary. Trains traveling at speed will derail if the rails are even slightly misaligned. The sun climbs higher with each rail placed, and with it comes the heat that will define the day. By mid-morning, the steel is warm to the touch. By noon, it will be nearly unbearable. By afternoon, even the briefest contact will be painful through the thickest gloves. This gradual increase in temperature marks the passage of time more reliably than any pocket watch. Your water jug, filled to the brim this morning, already shows signs of the day's consumption. The liquid inside has begun to warm, taking on the metallic taste of the container. Water discipline becomes crucial as the day progresses. Run out too early, and the afternoon hours become a dangerous battle against dehydration. Conserve too carefully, and your performance suffers, potentially leading to accidents. The work develops its own rhythm as the morning progresses. Lift, carry, position, align. Each rail identical to the thousands that came before, each placement following the same careful procedure. Your body settles into the familiar patterns of movement, muscles remembering the angles and timing required for efficient lifting. This automation is both blessing and curse. It allows you to work despite exhaustion, but it also means your mind can wander to uncomfortable places. A brief commotion at the Chinese crew's worksite draws your attention. One of their men has discovered a rattlesnake coiled beneath a pile of ties, its warning rattle clearly audible across the work area. The snake, probably seeking shade from the growing heat, has chosen an unfortunate hiding place. The Chinese workers handle the situation with calm efficiency, using long tools to encourage the snake to relocate to less populated territory. The incident serves as a reminder of the various dangers present in this environment beyond the obvious hazards of heavy lifting in hot steel. Rattlesnakes, scorpions, and other dangerous creatures make their homes in the prairie, and the construction activities often disturb their normal habitats. Most men have learned to check carefully before reaching into any shadowed space or moving materials that have been sitting undisturbed. Your crew lifts another rail, the morning's heat beginning to make itself felt through the steel. The metal is noticeably warmer now, and you can feel the temperature through your gloves. By afternoon, these same rails will be hot enough to cause burns, adding another layer of difficulty to work that is already challenging enough in moderate temperatures. The positioning of this particular rail requires more adjustment than usual. The ties beneath it have shifted slightly during the night, probably due to temperature changes in the soil. This means careful work with wedges and hammers, making tiny corrections that seem insignificant but are crucial for the safety of future trains. You stand holding your end of the heavy rail while other men work beneath it, sweat beginning to gather on your forehead despite the relatively cool morning air. During this enforced pause, you become aware of the vast emptiness that surrounds this small island of human activity. Miles of prairie grass stretch to every horizon, broken only by the raw scar of the railroad grade and the scattered equipment of the construction crews. The isolation is profound, a reminder that civilization is days away in any direction, that help in case of serious emergency might not arrive for weeks. The rail finally settles into proper position, and you release your grip with the familiar mixture of relief and anticipation for the next lift. Your shoulders already show signs of the day's work, a dull ache that will intensify as the hours pass. The brief rest between rails has become increasingly precious, these few minutes to straighten your back and prepare for the next effort. A supply train arrives from the eastern railhead, its whistle echoing across the prairie as it approaches the end of completed track. The locomotive pulls a string of flat cars loaded with rails, ties, and other materials needed for the day's work. More importantly, it carries fresh water in large tank cars, the most precious cargo in this dry environment. The arrival of supplies creates a brief break in the work routine as materials are unloaded and positioned for easy access. You take advantage of this pause to refill your water jug from the train's tank car, savoring the relatively cool liquid that flows from the spigot. The water tastes of metal and chemicals, but after hours of drinking from your warm jug, it seems like the finest beverage imaginable. The Chinese workers move with particular efficiency during the supply break, their smaller frames allowing them to navigate the crowded flat cars more easily than the larger American and Irish workers. You've learned to respect their skill and organization, despite the language barriers that make communication difficult. They work as a coordinated unit, each man knowing his role without need for extensive verbal instruction. Work resumes with the sun approaching its zenith, the heat beginning to build toward the brutal intensity that will characterize the afternoon hours. The steel rails on the flat cars are noticeably warmer now, and you know that handling them will become increasingly difficult as the day progresses. The wooden ties have begun their daily expansion, creating small creaking sounds as the resin inside them responds to the rising temperature. Your crew gathers around the next rail, now warm enough that the steel feels alive beneath your gloves. The lift seems more difficult than it should, partly due to accumulated fatigue and partly because of the psychological weight of knowing how many more rails await your attention. Each piece of steel represents a small victory in the great project, but also another step in what seems like an endless journey across the continent. The positioning process takes longer now, your movements more deliberate as the heat begins to affect your concentration. Mistakes become more likely as the day progresses, and a moment's inattention while handling these massive pieces of steel could have serious consequences. You force yourself to focus on each step of the process, checking and double-checking alignments despite the growing discomfort. Between rails, you allow yourself a careful sip from your water jug, now noticeably lighter than it was at dawn. The liquid inside has warmed considerably, taking on an unpleasant metallic taste that you've learned to ignore. Proper hydration is essential in this environment, but water is a finite resource that must be carefully managed throughout the long workday. The sun reaches its zenith as you position what must be the 20th or 21st rail of the day, though exact counting has become difficult in the growing heat. The steel is now hot enough to be uncomfortable even through heavy gloves, a preview of the brutal conditions that will characterize the afternoon hours. Sweat has begun to gather on your forehead and under your arms, the first signs of your body's attempt to regulate temperature in this increasingly hostile environment. The midday break arrives like a reprieve from torture, the foreman calling a halt to rail laying while the sun reaches its most punishing angle. You walk slowly back toward camp, your legs already stiff from hours of lifting and carrying. The completed track behind you shimmers with heat waves, the steel rails too hot now for any direct contact, even brief. At the mess area, Murphy ladles the familiar mixture of beans and salt pork into your tin bowl, the same monotonous fare that has sustained you for months. The food is barely warm, but your body craves the calories and salt you've lost through the morning's sweating. You eat slowly, partly from exhaustion and partly to make the meal last as long as possible, knowing it will be hours before the next opportunity for nourishment. The weak coffee provides caffeine your system desperately needs, though the liquid is now lukewarm and bitter. You drink it anyway, feeling the slight stimulation it provides to your fatigued body. Around you, other men eat with the same methodical determination, fueling themselves for the afternoon's work while trying to rest in whatever shade can be found. The break passes too quickly, and soon Hartwell is calling the crews back to work. The sun has reached its peak intensity, turning the worksite into a furnace that will test every man's endurance. You gather your tools and walk back toward the rail cars, knowing that the next few hours will be the most challenging of the day. The afternoon shift begins with steel so hot that even approaching the rails requires caution. The metal has absorbed hours of direct sunlight, making it painful to touch even briefly through the thickest gloves. Your crew gathers around the next rail with visible reluctance, everyone understanding that the simple act of lifting will now involve additional suffering. The steel burns through your gloves as you grasp it, the heat seeming to penetrate directly into your palms. The lift feels more difficult than usual, not because the rail has gained weight, but because maintaining grip on the hot metal requires constant conscious effort. Each step toward the positioning point becomes a battle against the urge to drop the burning steel and seek relief. You successfully place the rail and immediately step back, flexing your hands to work out the pain from the heated metal. Even through thick leather gloves, the steel has left its mark, a burning sensation that will persist for several minutes. This is just the beginning of the afternoon shift. The rails will only get hotter as the sun continues its relentless assault. The work continues with grim determination, each rail more challenging than the last as the temperature rises. Your water breaks become more frequent but necessarily shorter. The liquid in your jug is now hot enough to brew tea, but it still provides essential hydration for your overheated body. The metallic taste has become more pronounced, but you've learned to ignore such minor discomforts in favor of survival. Sweat pours from your body now, soaking through your shirt and creating dark stains that attract clouds of insects. Salt burns your eyes as perspiration runs down your forehead, and you frequently wipe your face with a bandana that's already soaked through. The simple act of clear vision becomes a constant battle against your body's attempts to cool itself. By mid-afternoon, the steel rails have become almost untouchable, even through gloves. Each lift now requires rapid movements, grasping the metal for as short a time as possible while still maintaining the control necessary for safe handling. Your crew has developed techniques for dealing with the heated steel, using cloth wrapping and frequent position changes to minimize contact time. The heat radiates from every surface now, the wooden ties expanding and contracting with audible creaks, the metal rails shimmering with visible heat waves. Even the tools have become uncomfortably warm, their metal surfaces absorbing and holding the sun's energy. Working in these conditions pushes human endurance to its absolute limits, but the work must continue because there is no alternative. Your water jug feels lighter with each break, the precious liquid inside now hot enough to be unpleasant to drink. But unpleasant water is still water, and your body needs every drop you can provide. Dehydration in this environment can be fatal, and you've seen men collapse from heat exhaustion when they failed to maintain proper fluid intake. The positioning of each rail becomes more difficult as the afternoon progresses, not just because of the heat, but because accumulated fatigue affects your precision and coordination. Simple tasks that were routine in the morning now require conscious concentration to perform safely. The margin for error continues to shrink as conditions worsen and energy reserves dwindle. A brief emergency interrupts the work when one of the Irish crew members shows signs of heat exhaustion, his face flushed and his movements unsteady. The man sits heavily in whatever shade can be found while others pour precious water over his head and neck, trying to bring down his core temperature. There's no doctor in camp, no medical training beyond basic first aid, so the treatment is simple and desperate. The incident serves as a stark reminder of how dangerous these working conditions have become. Heat exhaustion can progress to heat stroke quickly, and heat stroke in this remote location would likely be fatal. Everyone understands the risks, but the work must continue because schedules must be met, because investors demand progress, because stopping means failure in a project where failure is not acceptable. Work resumes after the brief medical emergency, though everyone moves more cautiously now, aware of how close they all are to the same fate. The heat continues to build, making each rail lift an exercise in endurance as much as strength. Your gloves provide minimal protection against the superheated steel, and your hands develop new blisters despite the thick calluses earned through months of this labor. The sun seems frozen at its highest point, its movement imperceptible from one moment to the next. Time takes on a strange quality in this extreme heat, each minute stretching endlessly while somehow the hours still pass. You've learned not to look at the sun's position too often. It only makes the remaining work seem more daunting and the heat more oppressive. Your crew lifts another rail, the steel now so hot that maintaining grip requires rotating hand positions every few seconds. The metal seems to burn through the leather of your gloves, creating new hot spots that will become blisters by evening. Each step toward the positioning point requires conscious determination to maintain hold on the burning steel. The rail settles into position with the usual precision, but the effort leaves you dizzy and nauseous from the heat exposure. Dark spots dance at the edges of your vision, warning signs that your body is approaching its limits in these brutal conditions. You force yourself to drink more of the unpleasantly hot water from your jug, knowing that dehydration will only make the heat exhaustion worse. The afternoon shift stretches endlessly, each rail seeming to take longer than the last as the cumulative effects of heat and exhaustion take their toll. Your movements become more deliberate, more careful, as the margin for error continues to shrink. A mistake now, in these extreme conditions, could easily result in serious injury or death. Finally, mercifully, the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, though the heat continues unabated. The steel rails remain dangerously hot, but there's psychological relief in knowing that the worst of the day's temperature is behind you. The foreman begins to calculate how much more work can be accomplished before the combination of failing light and extreme heat makes rail laying too dangerous to continue. You lift what you hope will be among the final rails of this brutal day, your body operating purely on determination now. Every muscle aches, every breath brings superheated air into your lungs, every movement requires conscious effort to complete. The rail feels heavier than ever, not because its weight has changed, but because your strength has been gradually sapped by hours of working in conditions that challenge human survival. The positioning takes longer than usual, your heat-exhausted crew moving with the careful deliberation of people operating at the very edge of their capabilities. Precision remains essential, but achieving it requires extra time and effort when your body is desperately trying to cope with the extreme temperature. The rail finally settles into proper position, another small victory in what feels like an endless war against the elements. As the sun touches the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that mock the day's heat, the foreman finally calls an end to the rail laying. His voice carries across the worksite like a benediction, releasing you from the relentless cycle of lifting superheated steel that has defined the last several hours. You set down your tools with hands that shake from heat exhaustion as much as fatigue. The walk back to camp feels interminable, your legs unsteady after hours of working in extreme heat. The ground beneath your feet still radiates accumulated warmth, adding to the overall misery that has become your constant companion. Around you, Other crews finish their own tasks with the same visible relief, everyone understanding that they've survived another day of conditions that push human endurance beyond reasonable limits.